So here's what you're going to need to complete this part of the task, to glue up the handle. You're going to need a piece of cardboard. Just cut it off an old box, doesn't matter. You're going to need some kind of stirrer or spatula, such as this. Also, your handy dandy popsicle stick will work for that job. You are going to need your 2-part paste, epoxy paste. You're going to need some paper towels and some denatured alcohol. Okay, and a China marker certainly wouldn't hurt. So the first thing we're going to do, I always like to work the butt corks first. So the first thing you put down is you take your winding check and you run that on the rod all the way down to where your butt cork's going to sit. And I'm going to get rid of this so we can see what we're doing better. Run it all the way down to where your butt cork's going to sit, and then put your butt cork on here. Take your popsicle stick, run your winding check down to where your cork is going to end. Okay, and then take it back off. So now you have kind of a marker as to where it's going to be. And then the next thing I do is I take that next winding check and I run that down the rod with my rear handle cork, and I run that down to about where I want that. Now if you remember correctly, I said I usually like to have mine about 9 inches or so. So I'm going to take and I'm going to measure approximately 9 inches. This isn't rocket science. This is pretty low tech. Then I take my China marker and I'll make a mark right here. And I'll know that's where my glue line needs to start. Okay, so I've got my winding checks in place. I'm ready to glue. So the first thing I like to do is I like to use the resin first. Take some resin out of the jar. Just an amount, whatever you think you're going to need. Put it on the cardboard. Close the jar back up. Try and keep this into a bit of an area where you can kind of gauge the size, like so. And then I take a paper towel and clean that spatula off before you go dipping it into the hardener jar. Otherwise you'll have a chemical reaction and your hardener will go bad. So then I take my hardener, scoop out approximately the same amount. This is a 50-50 mix. It's not earth-shattering critical, just approximate. So you put some down there, about the same amount. That's pretty close. Close that up and mix her up. Like I said, this is low tech. Just scrape on the bottom or scrape on the cardboard. Make sure you get all the resin and the hardener incorporated into one another, and do a really good thorough job of mixing. Very important to get all that hardener and resin mixed up equally. Okay, so we're probably pretty good there. We got a pretty good mix. Now what I like to do is take my butt cork first. How many people out there are giggling every time I use the term butt cork? So I take that and I put a little bit of the epoxy in there. Get it all around the edges and get some into the bottom. You can be pretty liberal with it, because for this part I do not put epoxy on the rod. I only put it inside the cork, because that's where I believe that's the only place where I think you need it. Stick it on there. That's done. That's glued on. Now here's our mark right there. We're going to put epoxy on the rod blank. Now go all the way around the whole rod and circle it 360 degrees, and I usually go about half the distance of what the cork will cover. Some guys will take it all the way down to the bottom mark or to where the winding check is. I don't think you need to do that, and I'm going to show you why here in a minute. I go about halfway down, just like that. Okay. Now when you take your cork and you're running it on here, turn the rod as you run the cork down. And there's why I don't put it all the way down to the end, because I'm pushing a bead of epoxy, and if you keep turning while you're putting it down and just take your time, that epoxy is going to follow it. And you're going to get plenty there. So now I'm just going to take my finger and I'm going to wipe off some of the excess and finish that off. There it is. So once you got that handle on, now you got to do the reel seat. Same thing. This is low tech. I'm going to put this stand here. Take the reel seat, run the, whoop, I got it, dropped it. And go retrieve that. That's what happens during live TV, folks. Alright, so you take that reel seat, and get it ready, and all what I do is I take some epoxy and I run some epoxy right along up against the cork right here. Turn that so you can see it. Hope that's coming in nice and clear for you. Take some more epoxy. Now I don't get crazy with the amount of epoxy I put here, especially with this style of reel seat. When you're using the other style of reel seat, you can get pretty crazy with it, but I don't think you need to with this. And then I take and I make sure I get some up here on the shoulder a little bit. Like I said, I don't get too crazy with the amount because it's going to ooze out. The more you have on there that oozes out, the more cleanup you have to do later. But you want to make sure you have enough. There's a happy medium in there. Okay? So there we've got epoxy on there. Same thing here. When you push the reel seat up, give it a few twists. There. So now the reel seat's glued up. Now we've got the front half of the reel seat to do. So it's going to be the same thing. Run it down the end of the rod. Ah, doggone it. I forgot a step. I need a winding check. Like I said, you never know what's going to happen on live TV. So let me get a winding check out. Take that part off. There's winding check down there. Run it down to right about there. That's where that's going to sit. Now, that's got a nice tight fit to it, so I don't have to do anything more other than to make a mark right here. Push that out of the way. Take some more of my epoxy. Here again, I'm not going to get crazy stupid with the amount. I'll put some on. I'm going to roll it all the way around the rod. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to run it about halfway. And that's more than enough. Actually, I went a little bit beyond halfway, but that's alright. Now, before I do this, I'm going to take a piece of tape. I'm going to cap off these threads. I don't want to get any epoxy on these threads because I'm just going to have to clean it up later. Just like so. We take that winding check, or that reel seat, that second half, turn it while you bring it down. You can see I've got a bead going there again. So this, rather than wipe off the excess, I'm going to run it right up to the winding check. Then I'm going to take my paper towel and a clean spot. And I'm going to wipe it off, just like that. Okay. Now the final, the last little part is the oversized rubber winding check that I'm going to use for a foregrip. Like I said, you can use cork here if you so desire. That is a personal preference. I am using this because this is what I like to do. And after all, it is my fishing rod. This you don't need much glue at all, real sparingly. And push that on. You see it's still got a bead going there, which is fine. Take your paper towel with a nice clean edge. And just wipe the excess off. And you know what? Paper towels are cheap. I'm going to grab another one here. Okay, so we have got our reel seat and our rod handle and everything all glued up. Now, one very important step, and I am going to back the camera off for this so you can see this. And I know everybody who builds fishing rods up to this point is going, why hasn't he lined up the spine? Which is what I'm going to do right now. Everybody who I've watched do rod building videos, you have to do what's called spining the blank. The premise is every time you make a round tube, it's got a spine. It's going to want to naturally, when you bend it, it's going to want to naturally end up in its own bend spot. So what you have to do is you have to find the spine of the blank. And the way I do that, once I have the handle all glued up, is I take it, I bend the rod. You can set it on a hard surface like such, or you can set it into a cradle like this and just put a bend on it. And there's where the spine falls naturally, and I can see my reel seat is off of that spine just a little. So I just take and turn it. Check it again. Oh, I went a little too far. There it is. There's the spine of the rod right there. So then the reel seat lines up with the spine of the rod. I spine it like this because I don't like to lay all kinds of marks up and down my whole rod, up and down the whole fishing rod. It seems like a waste of time to me. So I spine the blank at this point. So now that I've got the blank spined and the reel seat is lined up with the spine of the blank, what I do now is I took an old fishing reel. Let's take this tape off because we don't need that anymore. I took an old fishing reel and I cut the seat off of it. And I take that seat and I stick it in here, like so. Then I run the threads down on this. Just to make sure everything stays aligned. And then what I do again is one more time I check it to see that the reel seat didn't move on the spine. So now I take and I check my spine again, put a bend in the rod, and it falls back to its natural spine position. And the reel seat is all done. That's ready to go. Now what we do is we just let that sit. We let the glue set up. This paste is supposed to be good in 15 minutes. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So I usually let it set up for a good long time, a couple hours at least. Don't forget to clean up your spatula, because without that you will undoubtedly have a mess. If you're just using popsicle sticks, it's not an issue. Now, we aren't done quite yet. We're close. Now what we have to do is we have to do some cleanup. So take a little of the denatured alcohol here. And we just put some on a clean paper towel. And we just kind of be pretty liberal with it. We kind of do a check over to see if we've got any leftover epoxy laying around, and we just kind of clean it up. We don't want to let that epoxy harden up in a spot where we don't want it to be, because if we do that, it's there forever and there's no getting rid of it, and you don't want to do all this work for nothing. Now what some guys do when they build their fishing rods, they'll clamp all this whole program together. And you can do that if you want. I don't clamp my corks. Not for this process. It just doesn't seem necessary. I've never had one come apart, and this seems to work very well for me. So there's our basic handle. It's all assembled. Now we just let it dry. And once it's dry, then we can go ahead and we can start wrapping the guides and doing the decorative trim. So let's go over it. We got a butt cork and a winding check and a winding check here and a rear cork, the back half of our reel seat, the front half of our reel seat, and another winding check or stopper or whatever you want to use. So that's how I build fishing rod handles. Now, this is what's known as a split grip, where there's no cork in between these two, and a lot of people wonder, well, why do you do that? Well, I do that for one reason: weight, to reduce the weight of the fishing rod. And it's not because the fishing rod gets so heavy, it's that the more weight you have on a fishing rod, the less sensitive the fishing rod is. So if you can in any way, shape, or form reduce the weight of the fishing rod, you only increase the fishing rod's sensitivity. Weight acts as a mute for vibration, and when a fish hits it, if you have too much weight on there, you lose some of the sensitivity. So I like to leave them off, but you can certainly do full cork handles if you want. If you do full cork handles, it's basically the same process. You just get rid of some of the winding checks and you have a little more reaming to do with the reamers. But it's essentially the same process. I like split grips. I think they look nice. Overall, I think they function better in the long run. But that's personal. And that's the whole point of this rod building biz, is to do whatever makes you happy. Do what makes the rod the way you want it. So anyway, there's our rod handle. It's aligned with the spine. It's glued, and it is ready for the next step, which will be to put the guides on, which is what we will do in the next episode. So that's the end of this episode. I hope it was informative, and we will see you when it's time to start putting guides and decorative wraps on. Take care.